The Russian Empire, Rise and Fall, 1721 to 1917. Introduction. For nearly 2 centuries, the Russian Empire shaped the fate of Eurasia. It stretched from the icy waters of the Baltic to the forests of Siberia, from steppe frontiers to mountain strongholds. It called itself an empire of order and destiny, ruled by monarchs who believed their authority flowed from ancient tradition and divine right. Yet behind the grandeur lay a world held together by fragile bonds of loyalty, forced labor, uneven reform, and the relentless pursuit of expansion. The Russian Empire did not rise in a single moment. It emerged through war, ambition, and a belief that a vast multi-ethnic realm could be forged into a single state. This is the story of how that empire was built, challenged, reshaped, and ultimately undone. It begins with a single proclamation in 1721, when Russia's ruler declared himself emperor after triumph in a brutal northern war. From that moment, the empire moved through cycles of triumph and tragedy. Its rulers imposed sweeping reforms, commanded immense armies, and oversaw territories rich in culture and tradition. Yet those same rulers struggled to control the tensions between innovation and conservatism, privilege and progress, freedom and autocracy. Across almost 200 years, the empire expanded, endured catastrophe, drove back invasions, and then fell under the weight of its own contradictions. What to expect? In this episode, you will follow the Russian Empire from its official birth in 1721 to its collapse in 1917. You will see how the ambition of Peter the Great reshaped the state, how Catherine the Great expanded its frontiers, and how war against Napoleon transformed Russia into a major European power. You will explore the long 19th century, where reform and reaction shaped the lives of millions across a vast, multi-ethnic realm. This documentary examines the empire's institutions, its economic foundations, its social divisions, and the challenges faced by peoples from Poland to the Caucasus and Central Asia. You will also see how internal pressures, external defeats, and rising political movements weakened the imperial system. By the final chapters, the story leads to an era of revolution, uncertainty, and dramatic change. Through this journey, we reveal how one of history's largest empires rose, endured, and ultimately fell. Chapter 1. The Proclamation of Empire. The Russian Empire began with a declaration that came after years of hardship and determination. In 1721, following victory in the Great Northern War, Tsar Peter I accepted the title of Imperator from the Senate and the Orthodox Church. At that moment, the state officially became the Russian Empire. This new title was more than ceremonial. It reflected Peter's ambition to place Russia among the great powers of Europe. Before his reign, Russia had been a vast but relatively isolated land ruled by traditional structures and a nobility deeply tied to old customs. Peter believed that for Russia to survive and flourish, it needed transformation. The foundation of the empire was laid through intense reform. Peter reorganized the army, introducing standardized uniforms, improved training, and a system of ranks tied to service rather than ancient privilege. He built a navy from almost nothing, establishing shipyards along the northern coast. These changes were not merely military, they represented a shift in identity. Peter saw Russia as capable of becoming a state that matched the maritime and commercial powers of the era. Central to his vision was a new capital. In 1703, he founded St. Petersburg on marshland near the Baltic Sea. It became a symbol of his determination, constructed using enormous labor and shaped by European architectural styles. Unlike the ancient wooden cities of the past, St. Petersburg reflected the empire he wished to create. Outward-looking, disciplined, and connected to wider European currents. The design of its streets and buildings carried messages about order, hierarchy, and state authority. Peter also introduced administrative reforms that touched the entire population. He reorganized the state into new territorial divisions, created colleges to manage finance, foreign affairs, and justice, and demanded that noble families serve the state through education and military duty. He viewed service as the foundation of loyalty and achievement. These reforms were intended to centralize authority and reduce the influence of older power networks that had shaped Russia for generations. However, change brought resistance. Many traditional groups, including elements of the clergy and segments of the nobility, resented the shift toward European customs Peter's reforms reached into daily life. He mandated new dress styles, encouraged scientific study, and promoted secular education. The tension between the old and new would remain a defining theme throughout the empire's history. Peter also faced challenges on the frontier. The empire's vast territory was home to diverse peoples with their own customs and authorities. Integrating them required diplomacy and military strength. In the Baltic region, newly conquered territories housed populations with German, Estonian, and Latvian traditions. In the south, long-standing conflicts continued with the Ottoman Empire. Along the frontier, the empire balanced expansion with the need to secure stable governance. When Peter died in 1725, he left behind a transformed state, but also unresolved tensions. His successors inherited a new imperial title, a powerful army, and an expanding territory. Yet they also faced the challenge of maintaining unity across immense distances and diverse cultures. The Russian Empire had been declared, but its future direction remained uncertain. The next rulers would determine whether it continued on the course Peter had set or shifted back toward older patterns. The empire had been born in victory, but sustaining it would require balancing ambition with stability. And as the 18th century progressed, Russia would face both opportunities and trials that tested the foundations laid during Peter's remarkable reign. If you're enjoying this journey through history, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring stories like this to life every week. Chapter 2. Catherine the Great and the Expansion of Empire. Catherine II ascended the throne in 1762 after a dramatic shift in court politics. Her rise marked the beginning of one of the most influential reigns in Russian imperial history. Born in Prussia and educated in European ideas, she brought an outward-looking vision to the court. Yet her rule became associated with expansion, consolidation, and the strengthening of autocratic power. Under her leadership, the empire extended its borders, reformed its institutions, and shaped relationships with neighbouring states that would last for generations. Catherine understood the importance of stability. The early years of her reign focused on securing control over the nobility and ensuring loyalty within the military. She maintained close relations with influential families and worked to strengthen the system of privileges that tied them to imperial authority. At the same time, she encouraged intellectual life, supporting writers, scientists, and artists. This created an environment where new ideas circulated, even as the political system remained firmly centralized. One of the most significant events of her rule was the expansion into the Black Sea region. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire controlled the northern coast of the Black Sea, limiting Russian access to warm water ports. Catherine pursued a long-term strategy to change this. Through wars and negotiations, Russia gained large territories, including Crimea in 1783. This acquisition was a turning point. It opened new economic opportunities, allowed naval development, and provided access to trade routes that had been contested for generations. Catherine's ambitions also extended westward. During her reign, Poland underwent internal struggles that weakened its position. Russia, along with Prussia and Austria, participated in 3 partitions of Poland between 1772 and 1795. These partitions effectively erased Poland from the map and brought millions of Polish-Lithuanian subjects under Russian rule. This expansion created new administrative challenges. The newly acquired lands had established traditions, languages, and political identities. Integrating them required a combination of local autonomy and central oversight. Not all regions accepted imperial control without resistance. In the Volga region, a major uprising erupted under Yemelyan Pugachev, who claimed to be a resurrected Tsar. The rebellion spread across large territories and revealed deep tensions within rural society. Many peasants, Cossacks, and minority groups joined the movement, hoping for relief from taxation, conscription, and obligations to landlords. The revolt was eventually suppressed, but it reminded the court that vast distances and diverse populations could spark instability. Catherine also pursued administrative reforms intended to strengthen governance. She divided the empire into provinces and districts, introduced new legal codes, and encouraged the establishment of local assemblies for nobles. These assemblies provided a limited form of local participation, although real power remained with imperial officials. Education received particular attention. Catherine supported the creation of new schools and promoted a curriculum influenced by Enlightenment ideals. Yet, despite these reforms, serfdom remained deeply entrenched, shaping the economy and daily life for millions. The late years of her reign were marked by shifts in Europe. The French Revolution created uncertainty across the continent, influencing political debates and intensifying concerns about social unrest. Catherine took a firm stance against revolutionary ideas, focusing on preserving stability. When she died in 1796, the empire was larger, more centralized, and more assertive than ever before. Her policies shaped the direction of Russian imperial governance and left a legacy that her successors would navigate. Catherine's reign stands as a pivotal moment. She expanded borders, strengthened institutions, and balanced cultural exchange with political control, but the deeper tensions remained. The empire had grown, yet the foundations of its society were stretched, leaving future rulers with challenges that would echo across the next century. Chapter 3: The Napoleonic Challenge and Imperial Identity. The turn of the 19th century brought new challenges to the Russian Empire. When Alexander I became emperor in 1801, he inherited a state marked by recent expansion and administrative reforms. He was a ruler drawn to ideas of moral governance and cautious modernization, yet he faced an international landscape dominated by one figure, Napoleon Bonaparte. The confrontation between Russia and Napoleonic France reshaped Europe, tested the empire's resilience, and helped define its emerging identity as a continental power. The early years of Alexander's reign were shaped by cautious reforms. He reorganized ministries, encouraged educational development, and appointed advisors interested in administrative improvement. These efforts aimed to make governance more efficient. However, the pace of reform depended heavily on events abroad. Napoleon's rise in Western Europe introduced a new strategic reality. As France expanded its influence, Russia found itself balancing diplomatic agreements with concerns about shifting alliances. The first major conflict between Russia and Napoleon came during the War of the Third Coalition. In 1805, Russian and Austrian forces confronted the French army at Austerlitz. The defeat that followed was a turning point. It revealed the strength of Napoleon's military system and forced Russia to reconsider its strategy. Further clashes in Eastern Europe continued, including the battles of Eylau and Friedland. These confrontations showed that neither side could achieve a decisive advantage without immense cost. In 1807, the two empires reached the Treaty of Tilsit. For a moment, it appeared that Russia and France might coexist through cooperation. Alexander agreed to join the continental system, yet this agreement carried risks. The blockade placed pressure on Russian trade, and the arrangement forced Alexander to manage delicate relations with neighbouring states affected by French influence. Tensions gradually increased. Napoleon's actions in Central Europe, particularly regarding Poland, raised concerns in St. Petersburg. The possibility of a revived Polish state under French influence threatened Russia's western frontier. By 1812, relations had deteriorated beyond repair. Napoleon launched a massive invasion, crossing the Niemen River with a multinational army. The Russian response was shaped by strategy and geography. The empire's leadership decided not to engage in a series of early, decisive battles. Instead, they withdrew slowly, drawing the French army deeper into Russian territory. The vast landscape, limited supplies, and severe weather placed immense strain on the invading forces. When the Battle of Borodino occurred, it became one of the bloodiest clashes of the era. Although the French army advanced, it failed to achieve a decisive victory. Napoleon entered Moscow, expecting a political settlement. Instead, he found a city largely abandoned. The French army occupied the ancient capital, but the lack of supplies and the approaching winter forced a retreat. As they withdrew, Russian forces and harsh conditions inflicted heavy losses. This retreat became a defining moment in European history. It demonstrated the limits of military ambition when confronted with the scale of Russian territory and the steadfastness of its defenders. The defeat of the French invasion transformed Russia's international standing. In the years that followed, Russian armies advanced into Central Europe, participating in the campaigns that ultimately brought an end to Napoleon's rule. When the conflict concluded, Russia emerged as one of the leading powers at the Congress of Vienna. Its influence extended across Eastern Europe, and the empire gained recognition as a major continental force. The Napoleonic Wars shaped Russian identity. They reinforced a sense of resilience and highlighted the capacity of the state to mobilize vast resources. The conflict also deepened the connection between ruler and nation, creating narratives of unity that would persist. Yet beneath this unity lay ongoing questions about reform, governance, and the balance between tradition and change. The empire had overcome a great challenge, but the pressures shaping its society and institutions remained unresolved. Chapter 4. The Reign of Nicholas I and the Age of Order. When Nicholas I ascended the throne in 1825, the empire faced both uncertainty and expectation. His elder brother, Alexander I, had died without leaving a clear succession plan. During this moment of confusion, a group of army officers launched the Decembrist uprising in St. Petersburg. They hoped to push the empire toward constitutional reform. The revolt was swiftly suppressed, but it left a deep impression on Nicholas. From the first days of his reign, he saw instability as the greatest threat to the state. His rule became defined by order, discipline, and the preservation of autocracy. Nicholas approached governance with a military mindset. He valued structure, hierarchy, and obedience. To strengthen control, he expanded the powers of the Third Section, the empire's security apparatus. Its agents monitored political activities, literature, and social organizations. While the system sought to maintain stability, it also fostered an atmosphere of caution and restraint. Intellectual life continued, but public expression required care. Many writers, scholars, and educators worked within these boundaries, navigating the state's concerns while pursuing their interests. The empire faced ongoing challenges from its diverse population. Poland remained a sensitive region. After the partitions of the late 18th century, many Poles continued to seek greater autonomy. In 1830, an uprising erupted in Warsaw. Driven by hopes of national restoration, Polish forces attempted to reclaim independence. Nicholas responded firmly. The rebellion was crushed after a series of destructive battles. The aftermath brought significant changes. The Polish constitution was abolished, and the region was integrated more tightly into the imperial system. Russian became more prominent in administration and education, altering the cultural landscape. Nicholas also turned his attention to the Caucasus. The mountain regions were home to numerous ethnic groups with their own traditions and leaders. The empire sought to secure these territories for strategic and economic reasons. Resistance developed under influential figures such as Imam Shamil, who united groups in the North Caucasus against Russian rule. The conflict, known as the Caucasian War, lasted for decades. The difficult terrain and strong local leadership made it one of the most challenging campaigns of the era. Although the empire eventually gained control, the war revealed the limits of imperial power in remote regions. Economic development during Nicholas's reign followed a mixed pattern. Industrialization advanced, but slowly compared to Western Europe. Railways began to appear, including the notable line between St. Petersburg and Moscow. Factories expanded, particularly in textiles and metallurgy. Yet the economy remained heavily dependent on agriculture. Serfdom continued to shape rural life, binding millions of peasants to the land. This system provided labor and stability, but it also limited productivity and reform. Nicholas saw himself as the guardian of traditional structures. He supported the principle of orthodoxy, autocracy, and nationality, a doctrine that emphasized loyalty to the emperor, devotion to the Orthodox faith, and a shared identity under imperial rule. This approach aimed to strengthen unity across diverse populations. However, it sometimes pushed cultural assimilation and reduced the autonomy of minority groups. Peoples across the empire navigated these pressures in different ways, shaping regional identities within the broader imperial framework. Internationally, Russia pursued an active role. The empire participated in efforts to maintain European stability after the Napoleonic Wars, aligning with other conservative powers. Yet tensions grew in the Middle East and the Balkans, where Russia sought influence among Orthodox communities. These ambitions contributed to the Crimean War, which would dominate the final years of Nicholas's rule. The conflict exposed weaknesses in military organization, supply systems, and infrastructure. Despite the empire's size, the war highlighted the need for modernization. Nicholas I left a complex legacy. His reign strengthened autocratic authority, expanded territorial control, and preserved stability. Yet the rigid structures he created could not resolve the deeper issues within the empire. When he died in 1855, Russia stood at a crossroads. The challenges revealed by war, economy, and society required new approaches. The next ruler faced the immense task of steering the empire toward renewal without allowing instability to return. The coming decades would bring some of the most significant reforms in Russian history. Chapter 5: Alexander II and the Great Reforms. When Alexander II came to power in 1855, the Russian Empire was still engulfed in the Crimean War. The conflict had revealed deep structural weaknesses, military losses, economic strains, and outdated systems demonstrated the difficulty of competing with modern European states. Alexander understood that significant changes were required. His reign ushered in the most ambitious reform program in imperial history, reshaping society and administration. The most famous reform was the emancipation of the serfs in 1861. For generations, serfdom had tied peasants to the land and placed obligations on both landowners and the rural population. It provided stability, but limited economic development. Alexander's government introduced a system in which peasants could gain personal freedom and purchase land through long-term payments. This reform affected millions, altering the social fabric of the empire. While emancipation improved legal status, the economic impact was uneven. Many peasants struggled with redemption payments and limited land allotments. Still, it marked a major step toward modernizing agriculture and society. Alexander's reforms extended far beyond the countryside. He reorganized the judicial system, introducing courts based on clearer procedures, trained judges, and greater consistency. Public trials and legal representation created a new legal culture, increasing transparency. Local self-government bodies called zemstvos were established in rural districts and provinces. These bodies, made up of elected representatives, managed education, health services, and infrastructure. Although they operated under state oversight, the zemstvos offered new opportunities for civic participation. Military reform became another priority. The recent war had shown the need for a more efficient and flexible system. Alexander introduced universal military service, reducing the advantage once held by higher social classes. Training and organization improved, and the length of active service was reduced. These changes aimed to strengthen the army while easing the burden on rural communities. Economic development advanced during this period. Industrialization accelerated, supported by foreign investment, improved transportation, and new enterprises. Railways expanded rapidly, connecting regions and promoting trade. The growth of industries like textiles, mining, and steel production brought significant changes to cities. Urban populations grew, and new social groups emerged, including factory workers, engineers, and business owners. Despite these advances, challenges persisted. National minorities sought greater autonomy and cultural rights. In Poland, another major uprising occurred in 1863. The rebellion was suppressed, and the government implemented stronger measures to integrate the region, including increased use of Russian language and administration. In the Caucasus and Central Asia, expansion continued. Russian forces advanced into Central Asian Khanates, incorporating vast territories and extending imperial influence deep into the steppe and desert regions. These expansions created new administrative responsibilities and required a balance between control and accommodation of local customs. Reform also encouraged intellectual and political change. Universities and schools expanded, increasing literacy and creating an educated public. Debates grew about the future of the empire. Some advocated further liberalization, while others warned that rapid change would create instability. Radical groups emerged, influenced by new political ideas. Their demands ranged from expanded rights to complete restructuring of the state. By the late 1870s, the reform momentum slowed. Economic difficulties, rising political dissatisfaction, and concerns about maintaining order influenced government decisions. A wave of political violence began. Revolutionary groups targeted officials, viewing reform as too limited. These acts created fear and tension. In 1881, Alexander II was assassinated by members of a radical organization. His death marked the end of an era. Alexander II's reign transformed the empire, bringing essential modernization while exposing deeper social divisions. His reforms changed daily life and governance, creating new expectations and challenges. The empire entered the final decades of the 19th century with greater complexity and uncertainty. The next ruler would attempt to restore stability, but the forces set in motion would continue to shape the future. Chapter 6. Reaction and Industrial Growth under Alexander III. Alexander III assumed the throne in 1881 under the shadow of his father's assassination. The violence that ended Alexander II's life deeply influenced his approach to governance. Alexander III believed that the empire needed stability above all else. He saw the previous era's reforms as necessary but too rapid, creating space for radicalism and disorder. His reign focused on restoring authority, strengthening state institutions, and promoting social cohesion through traditional values. One of the first tasks of the new ruler was to limit political unrest. Alexander tightened control over universities, newspapers, and public organizations. Censorship increased, and the powers of the security services expanded. Local government reforms reduced the influence of liberal voices within the Zemstvos. These measures did not reverse all previous reforms, but placed stricter boundaries on public life. The government aimed to prevent the spread of radical ideas and maintain unity. Economic development, however, became a central achievement of this period. Under the leadership of finance ministers such as Nikolai Bungay and later Sergei Witte, the empire accelerated industrial growth. Railways expanded significantly, including the beginnings of the Trans-Siberian Railway, which aimed to link European Russia with the Pacific coast. This project symbolized the vastness of the empire and the ambition to integrate distant regions. Industrialization brought new factories, mines, and workshops. Urban centers grew as workers sought employment in cities like Moscow, St. Petersburg, and emerging industrial hubs. The state encouraged foreign investment, particularly in sectors related to metallurgy, textiles, and engineering. These developments diversified the economy and increased production capacity. Yet rapid growth also created social tensions. Working conditions were demanding and wages often lagged behind the rising cost of living. These challenges laid the groundwork for future labor movements. Alexander III also pursued policies aimed at strengthening Russian cultural identity. The government promoted the use of the Russian language and emphasized orthodoxy as a unifying force in regions such as the Baltic provinces, Finland, and the Caucasus. These policies sought to reinforce loyalty to the imperial center. While intended to strengthen unity, they placed pressure on minority cultures, leading to resistance in some regions. Foreign policy under Alexander III was cautious. Unlike some earlier rulers, he avoided major conflicts. Instead, the empire focused on consolidating existing gains and maintaining stability. Relations with European powers remained complex. Germany, under Bismarck, sought to maintain alliances that limited Russian influence. Meanwhile, tensions grew with the Austro-Hungarian Empire over interests in the Balkans. Alexander III worked to balance these relationships through cautious diplomacy, recognizing that the empire needed internal strength to navigate international complexities. Family and personal life shaped Alexander's public image. He was known for his strong physical presence and preference for simplicity. Unlike many rulers, he avoided elaborate court ceremonies. His emphasis on traditional values resonated with many, reinforcing his image as a guardian of order. However, his conservative approach faced criticism from those who believed that the empire needed continued reform. As the end of his reign approached, the empire had grown stronger in economic terms, but faced deeper questions about its future. Industrialization brought progress, but also new challenges. Cultural policies strengthened identity, but strained relations with minorities. Political restrictions provided stability, but suppressed meaningful discussion about long-term reform. When Alexander III died in 1894, he left his son Nicholas II a stronger, yet more complex empire. Modernization had accelerated, but society had become more diverse, and vocal demands for political participation, social improvements, and recognition of cultural rights continued to rise. The next ruler would face the immense task of managing these pressures while maintaining authority. The final decades of the empire would reveal whether the structures built over 2 centuries could withstand the challenges of a rapidly changing world. If you're enjoying this long-form series on the rise and fall of great empires, consider supporting the channel by subscribing and leaving a comment. Your engagement helps us bring more in-depth historical documentaries to life. Chapter 7. Nicholas II and the Last Years of Stability. Nicholas II came to the throne in 1894 at a time of growing complexity. He inherited an empire that was industrializing at a rapid pace, experiencing demographic growth and facing rising social expectations. Although he was deeply committed to the traditions of autocracy, the Russia he ruled was changing in ways that made older patterns difficult to sustain. His early years were marked by continuity, yet beneath the surface, the forces that would challenge the empire were gathering strength. Nicholas believed strongly in his role as a divinely appointed ruler. This conviction shaped his approach to governance. He valued ceremony, moral order, and the responsibilities of monarchy. Yet he was cautious with reforms and often hesitant to alter established systems. This conservatism contrasted with the rapid changes taking place across society. Cities grew as workers moved from villages to factories. New ideas circulated through universities, newspapers, and public discussions reflecting wider European intellectual trends. The government continued to support industrial projects begun under Alexander III. Finance Minister Sergei Witte played a crucial role in expanding railways, promoting heavy industry, and securing foreign investment. Under his leadership, the Trans-Siberian Railway neared completion, connecting the empire from west to east. These developments increased economic output and created new opportunities. However, they also intensified social pressures. Factory workers experienced long hours, limited rights, and challenging conditions. Labor disputes became more common, reflecting new forms of social activism. The countryside also faced strain. Despite earlier reforms, many peasants remained burdened by land shortages, population growth, and communal obligations. These issues contributed to rising tensions. In some regions, land disputes and unrest revealed the difficulties of balancing traditional rural structures with modern economic needs. The empire's vastness made it challenging to address these concerns consistently. Cultural and national diversity continued to shape imperial dynamics. The empire remained home to numerous ethnic groups with their own languages and traditions. Policies promoting Russian language and identity created friction in areas such as Poland, Finland, and the Baltic provinces. While some communities adapted to imperial structures, others sought greater cultural recognition or autonomy. These aspirations reflected broader global movements toward national self-expression. Foreign policy placed additional pressures on the empire. Russia's interests in East Asia led to rising tensions with Japan. Both states sought influence over Korea, and Manchuria negotiations failed to resolve these disputes, and in 1904 the Russo-Japanese War began. Russia expected a swift victory, but the conflict revealed significant weaknesses. The distance between European Russia and the Far East created logistical challenges. The army struggled to coordinate operations across vast distances. Battles at sea and on land ended in setbacks. The war's conclusion in 1905 brought widespread disillusionment. The defeat was a major shock. It weakened confidence in the government and intensified demands for change across the empire. Protests, strikes, and demonstrations emerged. Workers called for improved conditions, peasants demanded land reforms, and political organizations sought representation. In January 1905, a peaceful march in St. Petersburg, led by workers, was met with gunfire. The event, later known as Bloody Sunday, deeply affected public opinion. Nicholas responded to the turmoil by issuing the October Manifesto. This document promised civil liberties and created the State Duma, a legislative body. While the Duma offered new opportunities for discussion, its powers remained limited. The government retained significant control over legislation and could dissolve the assembly when tensions rose. Although the manifesto calmed immediate unrest, the underlying issues persisted. Despite these challenges, Russia entered a period of relative stability after 1907. Economic growth resumed. Agricultural reforms under Prime Minister Pyotr Stolypin aimed to strengthen rural productivity, and the empire regained some international standing. Yet the stability was fragile. The reforms did not reach everyone, and political divides remained sharp. When Nicholas II looked across his vast empire, he saw progress and continuity. But beneath the surface, the foundations of imperial authority were weakening. The next decade would test the empire in ways few could have predicted. Chapter 8: War, Crisis, and the Breaking of the Old Order. The early 20th century was a period of rising tension across Europe. Alliances, rivalries, and territorial ambitions created an atmosphere of uncertainty. For the Russian Empire, these pressures culminated in the outbreak of the First World War in 1914. The conflict placed immense demands on the state and exposed structural weaknesses that had developed over decades. What began as a surge of patriotism would become a struggle for survival. Russia entered the war as part of the Triple Entente alongside France and Britain. The initial response among many communities was supportive public rallies, newspaper editorials, and political groups expressed unity in the face of foreign aggression. The empire mobilized millions of soldiers, drawing from regions across its vast territory, yet enthusiasm did not guarantee readiness. The army faced shortages in equipment, transportation, and supplies. Communications across long distances proved difficult. Early campaigns revealed both strengths and vulnerabilities. Russian forces achieved successes against Austria-Hungary, advancing into Galicia. However, operations against Germany proved more challenging. During the 1914 campaign, setbacks at Tannenberg and the Masurian Lakes inflicted heavy losses. These defeats weakened morale and demonstrated the effectiveness of German military planning. The empire was drawn into a war of attrition that strained resources and infrastructure. As the conflict continued, economic pressures mounted. Factories struggled to meet military demand. Railways faced congestion, limiting the transport of food and supplies. In many cities, shortages of goods led to rising prices. The rural population, already facing challenges, carried an increasing burden. Many households lost laborers to mobilization, reducing agricultural productivity. These conditions contributed to rising discontent. The government attempted to centralize wartime production, but coordination proved difficult. Political divisions deepened. The Duma called for greater involvement in decision-making, while the imperial court sought to maintain control. Rumors, uncertainty, and disagreements weakened public trust. The influence of individuals close to the royal family, particularly Grigory Rasputin, became a frequent subject of criticism. Although many rumors exaggerated his role, the perception of instability at the highest levels damaged the government's credibility. On the front lines, Russian soldiers faced harsh conditions. Supplies of ammunition and equipment were inconsistent. Many units lacked basic items such as boots or warm clothing. Despite these obstacles, soldiers showed resilience. However, as casualties increased and victories proved elusive, morale suffered. Desertions became more common. Letters and diaries from the time reveal a mixture of loyalty, frustration, and exhaustion. By 1916, the Brusilov offensive offered a brief moment of success. Russian forces achieved significant progress against Austria-Hungary, inflicting heavy losses. Yet the empire lacked the ability to fully exploit the advantage. The offensive strained resources further, and German reinforcements stabilized the front. the wider strategic picture remained unfavorable. At home, social tensions intensified. Workers in major cities staged strikes demanding higher wages and better conditions. Food shortages led to long queues and rising frustration. Peasants grew impatient with government policies and the ongoing demands of war. Political groups across the spectrum called for change. Moderates sought constitutional reform, while more radical movements demanded sweeping transformation. The winter of 1916 to 1917 brought severe challenges. Transportation disruptions limited food deliveries to cities. In Petrograd, shortages sparked protests and strikes. The situation escalated rapidly. Demonstrations grew, workers left factories, and crowds filled the streets. Troops sent to restore order hesitated. Some refused orders, and others joined the protesters. In March 1917, the pressure became overwhelming. Advisors urged Nicholas II to abdicate. Faced with the collapse of authority, he agreed. His decision ended more than 3 centuries of Romanov rule. A provisional government formed with hopes of establishing a new political order. Yet the empire was deeply fractured. Months of uncertainty and competing visions followed. The old structures had fallen, but unity proved elusive. The empire stood at the edge of transformation, entering a period of profound change. Chapter 9. The Unravelling of Imperial Unity. The abdication of Nicholas II in 1917 marked a turning point not only in Russian history, but also in the story of the empire itself. The Romanov dynasty had been the central pillar of imperial authority for centuries. Its removal left a vast, diverse state without a clear direction. The provisional government that replaced the monarchy faced immediate challenges, and the forces that had been building for decades converged in a moment of intense uncertainty. The provisional government sought to establish a new political framework based on representation, legal equality, and civic rights. It dissolved many of the restrictive laws of the previous era and promised elections for a constituent assembly. These measures reflected a desire to modernize the state and address long-standing grievances. Yet the government struggled with 2 fundamental issues: ending the war and maintaining stability. Its decision to continue fighting in the First World War proved deeply unpopular. Soldiers and civilians hoped for peace, and ongoing conflict drained support. At the same time, a network of councils known as Soviets emerged across cities and towns. These councils included soldiers, workers, and representatives from various groups. They operated independently of the provisional government and often held significant influence. In Petrograd, the Soviet wielded considerable authority. The dual power structure created confusion and competing loyalties. Ministries issued decrees, while Soviets issued orders. This overlap hindered efforts to manage the state effectively. National minorities across the empire saw the political upheaval as an opportunity to express their aspirations. In Finland, political leaders moved toward complete autonomy. In Ukraine, a central council declared increasing levels of self-government. In the Baltic provinces, local assemblies debated their future across the Caucasus and Central Asia. Communities explored various paths toward autonomy or independence. These movements reflected long-standing cultural, economic, and historical divisions. For centuries, the empire had been held together by central authority. With that authority weakened, local identities gained momentum. The war continued to shape events. Soldiers at the front faced difficult conditions and limited supplies. Committees formed within military units, challenging traditional command structures. Discipline weakened, and desertions increased. Railway networks became strained, limiting the movement of goods. Cities experienced shortages of food and fuel. These hardships intensified political debates and pushed moderate voices aside in favor of more radical solutions. In the midst of this turmoil, political parties competed for influence. Liberal groups sought a constitutional framework. Socialist parties debated their approach to power, reform, and war. Among them, the Bolsheviks argued for immediate withdrawal from the conflict and the transfer of all authority to the Soviets. Their message gained support among workers and soldiers frustrated by the ongoing crisis. The months between March and October 1917 became a struggle for legitimacy. The events of October 1917 brought a decisive shift. The Bolsheviks, supported by key units in the capital, moved to take control of major institutions. They acted quickly, occupying government buildings and declaring authority in the name of the Soviets. The provisional government, unable to gather sufficient support, collapsed. The new leadership promised peace, land reform, and worker control. These declarations aimed to address the immediate concerns of soldiers, peasants, and labourers. However, the situation across the empire remained unstable. Not all regions accepted the new government's authority. Conflicts erupted as different groups pursued their own visions. The war with Germany continued for several months before an armistice was reached. The dismantling of the old imperial structures created a power vacuum that allowed regional movements to assert themselves. These shifts signaled the end of the unified imperial state that had existed since 1721. The unravelling of imperial unity marked the beginning of a new and uncertain era. The institutions that had held the empire together were gone. New governments, councils, and assemblies emerged. The diverse peoples of the former empire navigated this moment with varying hopes and fears. The next phase would determine which forces would shape the region's future. But one thing was clear: the Russian Empire had entered its final chapter. Chapter 10: A World Without the Tsar. The fall of the monarchy in 1917 left a vacuum that reshaped every corner of the former empire. Without the unifying figure of the Tsar, authority-fragmented institutions built around royal power no longer had clear direction. A society long accustomed to autocratic rule found itself confronted with unfamiliar responsibilities and rising uncertainty. The transition revealed deep divisions that had been forming for generations. Daily life changed quickly. In cities, workers sought improved conditions and representation. Factory committees emerged to negotiate wages, hours, and production. In the countryside, peasants seized land that had long been controlled by noble estates. These actions reflected decades of frustration and the desire for autonomy, yet they also created new conflicts. Land redistribution varied widely between regions. Some villages reached agreements peacefully, while others faced disputes that lingered into the following months. Railways played a central role in shaping the unfolding situation. As the empire's main transportation network, they carried food, coal, and soldiers. But the system struggled under pressure. Strikes, shortages, and damaged lines disrupted movement. Food failed to reach cities on time, heightening tensions. Local authorities tried to manage distribution, but their capacity was limited. The logistical challenges emphasized how crucial the imperial state had been in coordinating vast territories. Cultural institutions also experienced change. Censorship laws were removed, allowing open publication. Newspapers, pamphlets, and public lectures multiplied. Political debates filled meeting halls and street corners. Artists and intellectuals explored themes of renewal and upheaval, reflecting a society seeking direction. Yet the rapid expansion of expression also brought conflict. Different visions for the country clashed, and old divisions resurfaced. Religious life shifted as well. The Orthodox Church had long been intertwined with the monarchy. The loss of the Tsar created uncertainty about its role. Some clergy supported reforms and sought independence from state structures. Others worried about the erosion of traditional authority. In many regions, communities balanced faith with pressing social concerns. The shifting landscape of belief mirrored the broader changes across society. Armed forces faced their own challenges. Soldiers returning from the front brought stories of hardship. Many units dissolved as men sought to return home. Desertions increased, leaving garrisons weakened. Officers attempted to maintain order, but authority depended increasingly on negotiation rather than command. The disintegration of military discipline made it difficult to enforce decisions or protect supply routes. In border regions, former imperial subjects debated their future. Finland moved quickly towards statehood. In the Baltic provinces, local assemblies considered new political arrangements across the Caucasus. Ethnic and regional conflicts intensified. Central Asian communities struggled with questions of autonomy and identity. The collapse of central authority allowed these regional movements to grow, often leading to competing administrations within the same territory. Meanwhile, the provisional government attempted to assert leadership. It issued decrees, organized committees, and prepared for a constituent assembly, yet it lacked enforcement power. Ministers debated political reforms, but events often outpaced their decisions. The government struggled to balance progressive policies with the need for stability. Its insistence on continuing the war further weakened support among soldiers and civilians. The Soviets increased their influence during this period. Their representatives coordinated food supplies, organized local defenses, and mediated disputes. The Petrograd Soviet in particular played a central role. It managed critical services and issued orders that often superseded those of official ministries. This dual authority created ongoing friction. While the provisional government held legal legitimacy, the Soviets commanded practical influence in many regions. By late 1917, the political landscape had shifted dramatically. Different groups presented competing visions for the future. Some sought a democratic republic. Others favored a federal system granting autonomy to various regions. Socialist parties debated the balance between economic control and political rights. Amid these discussions, frustration grew. Many citizens wanted decisive action to address shortages, inequality, and the uncertainties of war. The absence of the Tsar had opened a space for new possibilities, but it also revealed how dependent the empire had been on its central authority. Without a clear framework to replace it, the vast territory drifted through months of experimentation and unrest. The next chapter would be marked by conflict over who could claim the right to govern the lands that had once formed a unified imperial state. Chapter 11: Civil War and the Final Dissolution. The year 1918 brought a new and turbulent phase. With the Tsar gone and the provisional government disbanded, multiple factions sought control. The empire's collapse set the stage for a prolonged civil war that would decide the fate of the territories once united under imperial rule. This struggle was not a single conflict, but a series of overlapping battles, campaigns, and political contests that reflected the diversity of the former empire. The Bolshevik leadership aimed to consolidate authority. Their early decrees focused on land redistribution, worker control of industry, and withdrawal from the First World War. The Treaty of Brest-Litovsk ended Russia's participation in the conflict, but at a significant territorial cost. Many saw the treaty as a temporary measure necessary to stabilize the new government. Others viewed it as a betrayal. This division contributed to the formation of armed opposition groups collectively known as the White Forces. The Whites included former Tsarist officers, nationalists, liberals, and others opposed to Bolshevik rule. Their goals varied. Some sought to restore the monarchy, while others wanted a unified and democratic state. Their differences often made coordinated action difficult. Meanwhile, local groups across the former empire pursued their own objectives. In Ukraine, multiple factions vied for authority. In Siberia, regional governments attempted to establish stability. The Caucasus and Central Asia saw a mixture of independence movements and local conflicts. Control of transportation networks became crucial. Railways allowed armies to maneuver quickly across long distances. Strategic cities such as Kazan, Tsaritsyn, and Omsk changed hands multiple times. Supplies moved erratically, creating challenges for both sides. The vast geography made it difficult for any faction to secure lasting dominance. Battles were fought not only for territory, but also for access to resources, manpower, and communication routes. Foreign involvement influenced events. Several Allied powers sent forces to specific regions, aiming to reopen an eastern front after Russia's withdrawal from the war, or to support anti-Bolshevik elements. Japan advanced into parts of eastern Siberia. These interventions added further complexity. Local populations responded in different ways, sometimes cooperating, sometimes resisting. The shifting alliances created an environment where loyalties were often temporary and pragmatic. The Red Army grew in strength as the conflict continued. Under centralized leadership, it reorganized its forces, introduced strict discipline, and developed strategies suited to the empire's diverse terrain. Political officers ensured loyalty, while commanders adapted tactics to local conditions. The ability to draw resources from central regions gave the Red Army a significant advantage. Gradually, they pushed the White armies back. The human cost of the civil war was immense. Civilians faced shortages, forced requisitioning, and displacement. Communities were caught between competing armies, each demanding supplies and allegiance. Disease spread rapidly as infrastructure weakened. The breakdown of imperial structures created gaps in authority that affected every aspect of life. Despite local resilience and efforts to maintain order, many regions endured hardship. By 1920, the major white forces had been defeated. Some leaders fled abroad, while others attempted to continue resistance in remote regions. The Bolshevik government reasserted control across most of the former imperial territory. Yet the victory did not automatically restore unity. National movements persisted. Finland, Poland, and the Baltic states established independence. Ukraine's status remained contested but moved toward new political arrangements. The Caucasus and Central Asia underwent further transitions as new administrative systems replaced imperial governance. The Civil War marked the final dissolution of the Russian Empire. The boundaries, institutions, and relationships that had defined the state since 1721 no longer existed. In their place emerged a new political structure shaped by the revolutionary ideology of the Bolsheviks. The old imperial order, built over centuries through reform, expansion, and adaptation, had reached its end. The story of the empire had been one of vast ambition and enduring challenges. Its collapse set the stage for the creation of a new state with its own complex legacy. Chapter 12: The Legacy of Empire. From its proclamation in 1721 to its dissolution in the early 20th century, the Russian Empire left a legacy that continues to influence the world. Its vast territory, diverse populations, and centuries of central authority shaped politics, culture, and society across Eurasia. Understanding this legacy requires examining how imperial structures evolved, how communities adapted, and how historical memories continued to shape the present. One of the most enduring features of the empire was its ability to incorporate diverse peoples. From the Baltic coast to the Pacific Ocean, the imperial administration governed regions with distinct languages, religions, and traditions. Some groups integrated into the broader imperial framework through education, service, or economic opportunity. Others maintained strong local identities and resisted assimilation. This tension between unity and diversity influenced policies on language, schools, and cultural expression. The legacy of these interactions continues in modern states that once formed part of the empire. Infrastructure projects shaped economic development. Roads, canals, and railways aim to connect distant regions. These networks encourage trade and migration, contributing to the growth of new towns and industrial centres. Yet development was uneven. Some regions prospered while others remained reliant on agricultural production. The empire's hierarchy often directed resources towards specific areas, reflecting strategic priorities rather than regional needs. These disparities influenced patterns of economic growth well into the 20th century. Education and intellectual life expanded significantly during the imperial era. Universities, academies, and schools promoted scientific study, literature, and public debate. Scholars and writers contributed to global knowledge, examining subjects from natural history to philosophy. However, education remained shaped by social class and geographic location. Access varied, reflecting the broader inequalities present in imperial society. The empire's legal and administrative structures influenced governance and public life. Reforms introduced during the 19th century created new courts, local assemblies, and municipal institutions. These bodies offered some degree of representation and contributed to civic engagement. Yet autocratic authority remained central, limiting the extent of political participation. The balance between centralized power and local initiative remained a defining feature of public administration. The legacy of expansion shaped geopolitical relationships. The empire's interactions with neighboring states involved diplomacy, conflict, and shifting alliances. Its influence in the Balkans, Central Asia, and Eastern Europe created long-term connections and rivalries. These relationships affected borders, trade, and cultural exchange. Many modern political questions trace their origins to decisions made during the imperial era. Social structures changed gradually. The abolition of serfdom transformed rural life, while industrialization created new urban communities. These shifts produced new social groups, including factory workers, professionals, and entrepreneurs. Their experiences shaped political movements and contributed to calls for reform. The tension between tradition and modernization became a recurring theme, influencing debates about identity, governance, and the future of the state. The fall of the empire had profound consequences. The collapse of central authority created opportunities for national independence in several regions. It also led to conflict, displacement, and social transformation. The creation of new political systems reshaped relationships between communities. Memories of the imperial past became part of public discourse, influencing views on heritage, identity, and historical responsibility. Today, the legacy of the Russian Empire remains visible in cultural traditions, architectural styles, and historical narratives across many countries. Its impact continues to shape discussions about borders, governance, and national identity. Understanding the empire's history helps clarify how its institutions functioned, how its people lived, and how complex relationships developed across centuries. The story of the Russian Empire is one of ambition, resilience, and profound change. Its rise and fall reveal the strengths and limitations of imperial rule. It stands as a reminder that vast states must balance unity with diversity, authority with reform, and tradition with the need for adaptation. If you found this exploration of the Russian Empire insightful, consider subscribing to the channel. Your support helps us bring more long-form historical documentaries to life every week. History reminds us that even the greatest empires depend on the choices of their people, and their legacies endure long after their banners fall